Hello, everyone. Jonathan from the Neon here, and we have two special guests with us today. Actually, two people who I've known for several years, both who at different points in their lives have worked at the Neon. So I'm excited to introduce both Luke and Tamiwa, who are Luke here in Dayton and Tamiwa out in LA joining us this evening. So thank you both of you for taking some time out and joining us for this discussion about Vinyl Nation. So can you tell me, each of you, just a couple sentences, tell me what you do now, what your careers are currently. Luke, can you start?
Sure. I own Skeleton Dust Records in downtown Dayton, Ohio. That's pretty much all I'm doing right now. That's all I've been doing since October 2017 is when we opened our doors.
Very cool. I can't believe it's been that long already. Wow.
Yeah.
Good for you. And Tamiwa, what do you do?
Hey, so I work at Warner Music Group. I work in film and television music where I help to literally pitch music for uses in film and television. So,
Fantastic. I want to remind people what we're talking about. The genesis of our conversation today is about the film Vinyl Nation, which is a documentary that's available in the virtual cinema at the Neon. So, the coronavirus and close downs and whatnot kind of made a lot of distributors start to figure out ways of still getting their films out into the community. And they knew that independent cinemas had a built-in audience. And so very quickly kind of pivoted and began to work with cinemas to bring their films to people in their homes. So Vinyl Nation is one of those films that we're offering virtually right now. And I'd like to remind everybody about the film by playing the trailer. So we're going to watch the trailer and then we'll come right back and chat about the film itself.
Vinyl, it's the only way to make sound solid, like to bring it into our dimension.
Listen, there's something sacred about the whole thing. 12 by 12, 33 RPM.
Putting it on your turntable for the first time and dropping the needle on the record.
It's magical. It's mind-blowing.
The thrill of what might be behind the door of that little shop. I've never been stunned to find an MP3.
What are you here for?
Reason.
You have people who are actually all from different areas of life, different ages, different backgrounds. But when it comes to this thing, we're kind of mostly on the same page.
You put that back in the sleeve, that's your album.
There are a lot of different ways that I could listen to a song. I keep listening to them on vinyl because of how it feels.
What you're talking about is large groups of people who previously were not affluent enough to be targeted. It was very affordable, it sounded great.
And then of course by the 1980s, the coming of the CD, record sales begin to fall off a cliff.
It was like, no, why? It's here, why change it?
It all came crashing down in the Napster era.
People would bring in all their records and on top of the pile would be their turntable.
It got worse before it got better.
There was this sense that music was becoming ever more portable, but at the same time, there were people who were also interested in having music that they could hold in their hand.
More and more people started making vinyl again.
You all of a sudden realize that there's more and more stores opening up.
I think we're seeing this pendulum swing back towards analog because we're gathering around together in a much more human way.
It's a good thing to discover things that I didn't really live, but other people lived.
We have each other's backs. It's an awesome sisterhood.
I'm not gonna cry, Kevin.
I only have faith in a couple of things. Music is one of them. Love is the other.
All right. So why don't we talk about just kind of first responses to the film? How'd you feel about it?
I enjoyed it. It was a nice kind of overall look at the vinyl industry. It was a really good, I would say, introduction for people who are not like super familiar with what the vinyl record industry is like right now. And it was nice that it wasn't just a film about kind of like nerdy collectors, you know. They covered everybody that's interested in records. So like I liked how they talked about women and kids and just not just the typical white dad, you know. So I
Right.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel the same way. I like that it could be an introduction to that culture, if you want, but it delved into actually some stuff that I didn't know to, just around how, you know, when this started to scale again, when sales started to go up again in the late 2010s, like there's a whole cottage industry of scammers that are apparently kind of operating. So, but yeah, the film overall, I think it does a really nice job of not just celebrating something, but also critiquing, you know, doing, you know, holding a mirror to the culture, which I think is really
That was valuable. I definitely think so. But I also loved the portions about watching records being made. I feel like there was a certain section of the film that felt like maybe like a Mr. Rogers moment where we were getting like, you know, going into a factory and watching stuff. And I feel like I don't think I've ever seen this before. And I'm not even sure I really understood how records were made until, I mean, you guys you have been saturated in the culture a lot more. But like you said, Luke, it was definitely an intro for a lot of people to really just the physicality of creating records.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's still hard to wrap your head around. Like, I know what the process is, but it's still hard for me to understand how something like that could happen too.
From those little beads to
turn into a record that somehow, it's a pretty mind-blowing thing that humans have created that, I guess.
Right. I mean, digital sounds more like, I feel like I can wrap my head around, you know, digital more than I can like the physicality of a diamond on this little piece of vinyl. So
yeah, same. Just encoding music into plastic with dye, like that doesn't. I can like a code like makes much more sense to me as well. So
So you know, the film actually goes from, you know, it does culturally talk about music and its accessibility to people and being and that shift of when it's become more expensive. I feel like both of you were kind of in the record business when that kind of happened, right? I mean, you both have had careers besides what you're doing now. You've kind of been in music in one way or another for quite a while, right?
Mm-hmm. To me, I probably maybe saw a little bit of that before I did, because she had been working at Omega Music, the store that we both worked at together, for a little bit longer than me. So, and I feel like maybe around that time it was happening more. I think by the time I came in, things seemed to be expensive to me.
I totally agree with you. I think because I feel like I had been there like maybe a couple years and then came on. But even before then, I was in a different store that used to, you know, second time around, it was formerly a record store in like the 80s and like the heyday, and they used to do that. And then around the 90s, you know, talk about that wall of printing, pressing vinyl. They completely reshifted and went to CDs and video games and that kind of thing, and they stopped doing vinyl. So that in 2003, 2004, when I started working there, they were just talking about the idea of record store today again. I started to hear about that. And I remember conversations about, should we get back into it, should we not? They didn't get back into it, but then when I got to Omega, it was firmly kind of in place. And it was actually like indies like that were doing it. And then I think a couple of years later, it was kind of when Warner was like the official sponsor, I think, of the whole thing. And yeah, I mean, I think the way they talk about how, you know, participation by majors shifts the economics of it is always really interesting to you know.
Yeah, I think one interesting thing too is that I think the word they used to describe it was bespoke in the movie, like record pressing being like you know, at one point in time, that was how all music was available, right? And so it was kind of just like it was everywhere. And so probably the production costs weren't as high because of that. And then when it went away and then came back, it was kind of like this artisanal thing where people are using equipment that's 100 years old to make these records. So because of that, it just seems like a lot more of like a smaller handcrafted thing than it was before. And that kind of makes sense why maybe it got more expensive because of that too.
And I feel like there is, as mentioned by numerous people, and how I clearly respond to it too, is an album feels more kind of artful than any other format, and feels like it's a tangible, tactile thing. And it does. I mean, there's some part of me that totally is fine with the price point because I feel like I'm getting something in addition to the music. So something a lot more tactile, and and I certainly prefer the liner notes in an album than a CD, or certainly not the digital liner notes, which feel almost bizarre. But anyway, so one of the things that I loved about the film too was its talk about how record shop owners and people that work in record shops had to kind of shift and become a little more inclusive as to the varying tastes, musical tastes of people who were consuming the music. And I feel like there was certainly a time when I would go into a shop and I felt a little more reluctant to ask for more popular music. I mean, I was a big Madonna fan in college and needed every, UK import, and it had one extra track on it, or the art was a little different or whatever, and I needed it all. But there were definitely times when I was reluctant to talk to the person in charge asking for that particular thing. But I feel like it's changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
And to me, what you mentioned earlier, that you thought Luke was particularly good at being inclusive with people.
Yeah, Luke's always, I feel like, you like music, and you're not trying to be the best at listening to music. I think that's just the way that some people are brought into the record store culture, is about, this is my identity, this is what it means to me. And so I think people have a lot staked in that, and they project that out onto it. But I felt like you always had a welcoming vibe, and you weren't very hostile. Like, it wasn't all this. Yeah.
I mean, I've certainly, like everybody that loves music, has had feelings of entitlement and has probably been judgmental about other people's taste in music, or felt that mine were superior in some ways. But I think more and more as I go along, you can argue how good music is over and over and over again. And still, it doesn't matter, because people, they like it or they don't, and you can't argue with that. So it just doesn't matter.
Exactly. And even a thing I used to always think about when I worked at the store, when I was kind of managing the store, was just as a queer Black woman in that space, what does it mean to bring people into this space? And Omega is a historically Black record store. It was rooted in that community before it moved over. And so how do we keep those customers, and how do we not make people feel excluded when a lot of the customer base was that white rock attitude, And I just always think I think part of what's happening now is just breaking down those walls that were built in the 70s, when it was rock versus disco, this idea of, and we all know what that was now. It wasn't, it was about people feeling threatened by Black folks coming into a space that they want get them to be in. So I feel like all that's happening now is that we're not, musically, people don't care about genre like they used to either. So, we can all sit here and talk about Taylor Swift's new album and have a conversation about how that sounds and what the work she did on that, and then we can talk about some other people too, and it doesn't need to be about a judgment.
Yeah, it seems like it's interesting, music, it seems to be becoming more fluid in a lot of ways, where things are not defined as much as they used to be anymore. And I think you see that across culture in general, what's happening right now is that there's not really these boundaries and definitions of things like they used to be. You know, people have changed that, and it's the same with music, I think. So
I want to get into, well, first of all, are there other things from the film that you want to talk about? Other ideas or moments in the film that stood out to you?
I thought the thing that stood out the most to me that I've never thought about before was when they mentioned the basically streaming, people streaming music and vinyl culture kind of going like in tandem, as opposed to like, I think you always see it as like, oh, streaming culture is beating out physical record sales. But I think the way that they posed it was that it's actually kind of helping it in some ways. Like, and, you know, thinking about that, it's like, well, I have a Spotify account, and then, you know, you play a record, then Spotify will kind of do its thing and, you know, run the algorithm and play what it thinks you'll enjoy. And I'll discover new music all the time and add it to my want list to go buy, you know, an actual vinyl copy of. So in that sense, it works for me because it helps me discover new music, and then I just go out and buy the actual record.
Yeah, I do the same thing.
Sure thing. Yeah, and it's because you want that. You've heard something that you find that you like out of, you know, 1 out of 100 maybe, but then you really want that physicality of the actual vinyl pressing of it. And yeah, that is interesting that they maybe work together. Tamiwa, did you have something to add there?
No, I mean, I think the biggest thing that, honestly, that I didn't know was just, we were talking about this earlier, about the cottage industry of people who pretend to be record pressing plants. So they are just maybe waiting for someone to call and dial like a wrong number, or like even just look them up on Google, and they have their like faulty like result that pops up, and then they call and they get like a fake order out of them, you know. And that is someone who's like I'm actually getting ready to start my own label where I do like reissues and stuff. And I'll be dealing with record pressing plants. That's like really good information to have.
Yeah.
It's kind of wild.
It almost struck me as a little tangential in the documentary. I mean, as far as, you know, but I think like there's certainly stories there that I think I had no idea that there was a whole industry based on that kind of those kind of ideals, you know. But yeah, it is fascinating. I just felt like it seemed a little tangential to the piece of, you know, where we're talking about really personal relationships with music and whatnot, and then we got there. But I thought it could be its own film. It could be its own short film. Like,
exactly. I want to know about what's that industry like.
Yeah, valuable information nonetheless, because I had no idea that something like that existed.
Right.
Yeah.
We've got a few comments coming in from Facebook right now. We have Cody says, y'all looking cute. And Brittany says, when is this showing? It looks great. And someone chimed in and told them that it's digital and available on the Neon's website. So thank you everyone for chiming in there. One thing I want to ask is on related, but not related to the film per se. Do you remember the very first album that you bought with your own money? Just Tamiwa, you have it with you, Tamiwa? I love it.
Probably, yeah. I do. And I probably was 13 or 14 or 15. It was at Gem City, actually. This is a Japanese kind of like rockabilly band called the Michelle Gunn Elephant. Sorry, I'm not.
Nice one.
But this is it. I can't work the camera, but yeah.
Awesome. So what year would that have been?
This probably came out that year would have been probably 2002, 2003. So,
okay.
Yeah, but yeah. So that's the first thing I ever bought with my own money on vinyl.
Luke, do you remember what yours was?
I think I don't know the very first record that I ever bought, but one of the first that I ever bought was this. It's Fugazi. It's self-titled, or also known as 13 Songs. And I think I bought this at Hot Topic of all places, because they had a pretty awesome vinyl selection at one time.
They did.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is strange where you see vinyl pop up now and again. I mean, you might like at a bookstore suddenly has like a rack of like vinyl, or you're at a like a clothing store that suddenly has like a few just pieces of contemporary stuff, or maybe nostalgic-y kind of soundtracks. Suddenly like this Clueless soundtrack will show up on vinyl somewhere, whatever. But I do think it's fascinating where vinyl rears its head sometimes. But, so like Hot Topic. I actually, mine was Flashdance. And I was not allowed to see the movie. It was rated R, and I was much too young. But I had a thing for Irene Cara, and I needed the Flashdance soundtrack.
Very cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool to hear. Yeah, like I feel like that's a hallmark of my childhood too. Movies that I wasn't allowed to see, but I would buy the soundtrack. Like yeah, I used to do that too.
That's a thing at record stores, and I feel like I'm one of the only people that's ever looking through the soundtrack section at a record store. But it was interesting in the documentary that one of the first things that people mentioned was like the Crow soundtrack being available on Record Store Day, and how everybody wanted the Crow soundtrack. So I was glad to hear that I'm not completely alone, and there's always a soundtrack section at a record shop.
Yeah.
So I mean they're out there and people are looking for them, but I feel like I'm one of the only ones whenever I'm at a shop looking through them. But anyway, talk a little bit about Record Store Day. Luke, how is that for you for business?
It's great for business. It's probably our busiest day of the year for sure. I like it overall. Like, it's a good day. Some of the releases that they do, the exclusive releases for Record Store Day, which is kind of like I think sort of where it started. And a lot of times I don't think they have the best releases that they're presenting. A lot of stuff just doesn't really seem sort of worthy of its release. It's just, but there are some really cool ones too, like reissues of records that have been out of print for years, and the original copies sell for hundreds or thousands of dollars. And when they reissue that stuff and make it available, it's really cool. But overall, it's a really fun day. I mean, people are there because they're happy and they want to buy records, and so it's a good vibe. And we have DJs spin records, and so it's just kind of all about like records and music, and it doesn't get much better than that for me. So
cool. And Tamiwa, were you still working in the shops when Record Store Day hit?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Yeah. I was every year I was there. There was a Record Store Day, and yeah, like I said, it was just a seminal event. But it was just I love just the community building aspect of it. That was always like a nice day where you see everyone
and people camping out like to get in the night before.
That started happening like maybe the last 2 years that I was there, and I never had anticipated that was a thing that was going to start happening. It was incredible to see, but
pretty crazy. I would do
that. They started Art House Theater Day a few years ago, and we've not seen that enthusiasm yet for Art House Theater Day. So
I feel like it's coming.
Fingers crossed. Yeah. Yeah. So I asked you what your one of your first vinyls was that you bought. Do you remember listening to? I mean, did your parents have record players? Is that how you first heard vinyl, or what was your exposure to vinyl? Because I think you're both kind of young enough. Maybe your parents had it, but maybe they didn't.
Yeah, growing up, my parents definitely had records. I'm from Nigeria, and yeah, before we immigrated over here, I remember my parents listening to, I have some of those records actually right now, but just some Nigerian records, King Sunny Ade, some other like Nigerian juju artists. So that was always kind of like always a big part of the way I was introduced to music.
Okay, so it's always been part of your music intake is from vinyl. What about you, Luke?
I grew up I was born in '84, so I grew up on CDs and cassettes first, then CDs eventually. And so I kind of mostly just bought CDs for up until I was in high school, I think. And I just got an interest in DJing actually, which is something that they mentioned in the film about vinyl being a huge part of DJ culture, even at a time when it wasn't super trendy and popular like it is now. So when I was DJing, that was the way you did it, was by spinning records. So that's kind of what got me into records and record culture, was DJing, and first going to record stores to find the stuff I wanted to spin to DJ, and that's sort of how it started with me.
So I was born in '74, and I remember Burger Chef had Fun Meals, and Fun Meals was a predecessor to Happy Meals at McDonald's, but they were little flat trays that had a place for your burger and a place for the fries and a place for your drink. But if you flipped it over, sometimes there was a record pressed into the cardboard of the Fun Meal. And and I remember those, not being allowed to play those on my parents' stereo. Like you had to use like the kid record player. I mean, I wasn't even allowed to play that Footloose soundtrack on my parents' record player because they thought it was trash, and that it couldn't be played on their high-end stereo, which it was a big piece of furniture ultimately, with built-in speakers. So that was my introduction to records and vinyl. Was either, it was in my parents' world, it was either classical music, which was permissible on the the stereo, or it was not worthy. But anyway, but then I definitely, 45s were big for me growing up. So whether it was Blondie or the Pointer Sisters, or those 45s and whatnot were things that my sister and I loved and danced around to all the time. So I wish that there was a way. I remember growing up too, I had one of those records that my parents, one that I eventually started to use, had what's it called when you can change a record, where you can stack them and it puts the next one down.
Stackable record players,
Yeah. I love that. For 45s, I mean, otherwise you were up every 3 minutes changing.
Very inconvenient format, even for being records.
It was inconvenient. It was, I think, really more meant for a jukebox. I feel like that was maybe why 45s really existed as much. I don't know. Maybe just an idea.
I think they're a lot more fun to DJ with too. It's a lot simpler because you don't have to dig around on a LP to find the track.
Oh, sure.
So it's just the song, you put it on, that's it. So
totally makes sense. Yep. So I asked you to each bring some things with you today, some records that that you love, and maybe I said favorites, and Luke scoffed at having to pick favorites from all of his children as to which is the favorite child. But I asked you to bring some things with you that you kind of show and tell. So Tamiwa, you have something ready that you want to show?
Sure. Should I start?
Okay. Yep.
We'll just go one by one. All right.
Yep.
This is a record called The Message. It's by King Sunny Ade. He's kind of a preeminent juju. He pioneered a genre in Nigeria called juju music. But this is an album that I've known these songs since probably I was born. So a few years ago when I was able to find a pressing of this, it's not hard to find, but it didn't occur to me that I could just go and find a pressing of it, and I did. So to have it now back in my life.
Awesome. Very fun. I'm going to look him up.
Please do.
Luke, what about you?
Let's see here. One of my favorites would be this record, Congos, Heart of the Congos. It's my favorite reggae record of all time. It's just an amazing, it's a perfect reggae record. It's produced by Lee Perry, who's a very popular, or Lee Scratch Perry, as a lot of people know him, popular producer and musician in Jamaica. And the Congos, this is they're just known for this record, basically. They had, I think, one other LP, and they might have done a little other stuff, but this is the one that they're known for, and it's just one of the best reggae records ever made. So I've listened to it so much. It's such a good record. So
Very cool. I brought one that I love. I'm going to scoot back a little so I can open it. So the Umbrellas of Cherbourg soundtrack, which when you open it has the liner notes are in pink, and they are the lyrics to the song both in French with the English translation alongside them. So this is one that I'm always looking for when I go to a record shop, because I know there are better versions out there, and I have 3 copies of it. Like, I have to buy it every time I see it.
Do you know that I sold you a copy of that in Omega?
Did you? Did you?
I did.
It might
I did sell you
on my wall back there, actually.
Yeah, I love that album.
I love this so much, and I mean, like, you know, I don't speak French, but it's one of my favorite films of all time. So to have the French lyrics, you know, I can almost sing along with it, even though I don't know what I'm singing. So it's nice to know what I'm singing. And so I love that the lyrics are printed in that little pink paper inside. So to me, you have something else to show us?
Sure, let's see. This is an album by an artist named Anastasia. She's like a folk pop artist. She kind of, the thing about this album, this is one of the first albums that when I started working at music stores that I heard someone playing it, and I didn't know what it was, but I knew I loved it. And I asked what it was, and no one, I was like, hey, someone was playing something a few hours back, what was it? No one knew what it was, and then a year down the line, it showed up at the store again, and someone put it on, and I was like, this is that one album. So, yeah, I had to grab it, but she's kind of disappeared in the last few years. No one really knows what she's working on, what she's doing, but I hope she puts out more music. So it's fantastic.
Very cool.
I'm gonna look that up as soon as we're done here.
Oh, it's so good. Please do.
And Luke, you have another one?
Yeah, I do. This one is a record by the Jesus and Mary Chain. It's called Psycho Candy. And Jonathan, you'll appreciate this too, because the reason I discovered this band was from Lost in Translation, actually.
Oh, fun.
Which to me is one of the best soundtracks of any film I've ever seen before. It's an incredible soundtrack. And so this song is played in the scene, I think the very ending scene where he's kissing, I can't remember her character's name, Scarlett Johansson's character's name. But it's the very end, and they're playing this song, and it's Just Like Honey is the song that they're playing. And I think I saw Lost in Translation when I was probably about 18 or 19. So I was feeling pretty sentimental around that time, pretty emotional and gooey. And then I saw that scene, and just the song was perfect. It was perfect for the scene in the movie. And so I bought that record, and I became obsessed with the record. And I probably have listened to it hundreds of times. I think it's incredible. So that's definitely one of my all-time favorites.
Sophia's pretty great with music and films, and you know, so I'm anxious to see her next Bill Murray collaboration. But yeah, I think she's got a real sense for, I mean, even, and being very playful too with decisions with soundtracks. So very cool. I brought something very contemporary, but I love how nostalgic it is in its. So the Carol soundtrack, the score from Carol, they released it in what looks like a 78. So it's actually smaller than a traditional album, you know. So here's for scale. So it looks like an old Decca record ultimately inside, and I just love that it's kind of, you know, aware of its aesthetics, and it just seems right to release the score like that. But then of course it's, it opens and great illustrations. There are great photos inside, and I love this score anyways by Carter Burwell. So I just, it's one I love even though it's 2 years old. So.
Oh, I love that. Carol is just iconic.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah,
it's a highly designed film too, so that's so cool that the record is designed as well to be like sort of a period piece looking record.
Right. Right. There have been a few things like that with films that I admire. I know there's a film that I like that no one else liked, Cloud Atlas, which is it's kind of crazy, complicated film. But there's a scene in a record store in the film where one of the characters goes and is looking for a particular piece of music, and it's the Cloud Atlas Sextet, and they released that part of the score on what exactly she looks for in the score, but in like Denmark only. So like I had to like buy an import to like find, but I love that score so much. And it's where Halle Berry is asking, and somebody hands her and it's the music that's been in her dreams and she's been trying to find and whatever. And it just like, I was entranced. And then I love it's a gimmicky packaging, but I needed it too. So,
it works.
Yeah. Well, if you have anything else you want to share real quick, I think that, and if anybody has any questions that's listening or watching online, please pass those along in the next little bit here. But do you have anything else you want to share about music or the film or your own collection? Anything else that you're itching to show or talk about?
To show or talk? I don't know. What about you?
I don't know. I would just encourage people to be free with how they discover music, and don't feel afraid to walk into a store and ask them for something, or and just listen to whatever you want to listen to. Don't care about what people think is cool or what your friends think is cool. I mean, I think that's the way you can get the most enjoyment out of music is enjoying it without any restrictions or anything like that. So just be free. And once you do that, it just feels incredible and you'll just enjoy music all the more.
Yeah, I echo that. Whatever brings you joy, like that's the only thing that's important. Nothing else matters.
Very cool. Well, thank you, both of you. I really appreciate you taking some time to make this happen, to watch the film, and then to join me here this evening, all for kind of the love of the neon too. So thank you very much for all your support over the years. And of course, whenever Tammy was in town, she stops in. And when, Luke is still a regular, and even we're back open. We've been open since late June, and I see Luke and his wife Kathleen regularly at the theater. So thank you very much for all your support. And Tamiwa, of course, you were on the LGBT Film Fest committee with me for a few years ago. We're heading into year 15 right now for that. So on a very side note, I know you said you were seeing Ahead of the Curve the other night. And I did see after we had chatted about that Warner was actually a sponsor for Outfest.
Yes, I believe so. Yeah.
So that's very cool. What'd you think of the film?
I thought the film was great. Just seeing something that kind of historically goes back and talks about sort of lesbian history that I kind of wasn't aware of because it was a tiny bit ahead of my time. But yeah, it reinforces the importance of not just queer representation, but queer media, and how we have to really make sure to support, these institutions. So to that end, support the Dayton. We need to keep these things going.
You're cutting in and out just a little bit, but
Yeah.
I got the gist of what you're saying of the importance of that work. And it's fascinating too that, I always saw it as Deneuve magazine on the stands years ago. And then to know that Catherine Deneuve was like,
litigious.
Yeah, really. So
I didn't know that.
really upsetting. But anyway, so complete tangent there. But Luke, you'll have to watch Ahead of the Curve at the LGBT Film Festival this year. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so very much to both of you. And I really appreciate you taking your time and your talents to be a part of the conversation tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
And I wish you both the best after all this COVID business I hope we can sit down and have a beer next time you're in town, Tamiwa. And
Oh, I hope so too. I hope so too.
all right. Well, thank you very much, both of you, and have a good evening.
Thanks.
I'm going to sign off from the Neon here.
Okay.
And if you want to stick around a sec,